Our lesson from the New Testament letters is from the first letter of Paul to the church at Corinth, the 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 18 through 25. Perhaps just a word of background before I read that. In that church, there was a mix of Jewish people and also Gentile people, particularly Greek-speaking people. And the Jewish people of that day were longing for some great cataclysmic demonstration of God's power to come and just right the world of all the wrongs. The Greek people, very well educated, put their stock in higher education and good learning. They were very articulate, loved to debate and argue ideals. But the Apostle Paul, as he is writing to these people in this church in the first century, speaks to them about an ultimate power and a higher wisdom. The power, the wisdom of God that is revealed and demonstrated in Jesus Christ and his cross. So with just that little bit of background, hear the reading. For the message about the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved, it is the power of God. For it is written, quote, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, and the discernment of the discerning I will thwart, end quote. Where is the one who is wise? Where is the scribe? Where is the debater of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of this world? For since, in the wisdom of God, the world did not know God through wisdom, God decided through the foolishness of our proclamation to save those who believe. For Jews demand signs, and Greeks desire wisdom, but we proclaim Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and foolishness to Gentiles. But to those who are the called, both Jews and Gentiles, Christ, the power of God and the wisdom of God. For God's foolishness is wiser than human wisdom, and God's weakness is stronger than human strength. This ends the reading. It often strikes me how some of the most profound things are most simple. And some of the most simple things are most profound. And what I have to say today, I think, is quite simple, but quite profound, not because I'm saying it. I trust that it's drawn from the Scripture. But I think it's profound because it is so basic to life. It's related to every aspect of our life, somehow reflected in every aspect of our living. Elie Wiesel, who was born in Romania, an American Jewish man, quite a prolific writer, survivor of the Holocaust, and spent some time in concentration camps, 2 of them. In one of his writings, he makes reference to the creation, the story of creation, and specifically of God's creation of Adam as the representative of the whole of the human race, and thinks of us then as the progeny of Adam. And he tells it this way, quote, when he opened his eyes, Adam did not ask God, who are you? He asked, who am I? End quote. Rather interesting way of putting it. And I think that we can see ourselves as sort of the spiritual descendants of Adam in that wise. Rather than asking, who is God? He asked, who am I? And that became the focus of his entire life. That shaped his perspective on everything. In fact, it determined his perspective on everything. It shaped his worldview, his sense of values, everything that was to have meaning and purpose. You see, He considered himself standing at the very center of the universe, looking out over the glory of God's creation, its grandeur, all of its goodness. And he began to ask himself, now how does all of this relate to me? How can I get all of this to work for me and my advantage? What can I make of myself in this world environment? How can I create for me a destiny of my own choosing and then leave a legacy to my own glory? And so he studies, and he learns, and he becomes wise in his own eyes. And he works, and he develops, and he becomes strong in his own strength, until it's as though he becomes a law unto himself, and he begins to look at what is not his, what is forbidden according to a higher law and a more ultimate authority and a greater wisdom. But in his own wisdom, he perceives it to be good for himself, to be his food. And according to his perception of things, he sees it to be a delight to his own eyes, something that will satisfy his own desires, and somehow becomes convinced that it will give him ultimate wisdom and power to be his own God, to become his own arbiter, his own decider of what is right and wrong and what is good and what is evil. Rather than asking, "Who are you, O God?" he asks, "Who am I?" Rather than worshiping God beyond himself, he becomes all wrapped up in himself. And I think we see Adam lived out throughout the history of humanity and civilization. In the gospel reading this morning, the sellers of animals, the money changers in the temple had turned the house of God into a marketplace, a place of profit for themselves rather than the worship of God, twisting religious practice simply for their own self-serving advantage. Now, I trust that we don't do something so blatant as that, but we can easily do in a similar way the same thing, but perhaps in a much more subtle way. For example, we may well come to worship on a Sunday morning and tend to turn our worship of the true and living God back toward ourselves. And with Adam, we keep asking, well, how does this all work for me? How does this relate to me practically? How can I use this to my advantage? How does it fit my understanding of myself and the destiny that I seek for myself? And then when we leave worship and go back into the next week of our lives, we keep asking, well, how might God, what's in the Bible and what we do and our involvement at church and all, how can I make sure that that conforms to the reality of my life and the advantage of my chosen ways? Rather than asking, how might God transform me and my way of life to God's more ultimate reality, to be in line with His direction, His higher purposes, His deeper truth? Instead of asking, who are you, O God? We keep asking, well, who